The First Woman to Vote in the State of California by Carolyn Polizzi. All kinds of people came to California during the boom years, including champion stagecoach driver Charlie Parkhurst. Listen up and I'll tell you the story of the first woman to vote in the state of California. She cast her ballot almost 50 years before American women won the right to have their say at the polls. First, though, I have to tell you about Charlie. Like thousands of other adventurous young folks, Charlie came out west when gold was discovered up at Sutter's Mill. Instead of scrabbling in the dirt for those little flakes of shiny metal, Charlie drove the stage. Sitting up on the driver's box behind 6 spanking horses, Charlie was admired by everyone. It wasn't just his stocky good looks and the beautiful fringed driving gloves he wore. Charlie was admired for his skill and his daring. Once, during the worst of the winter's rainstorms, Charlie loaded up the Congress coach for his run out of Placerville. "Can you get me into Stockton on time?" his one passenger asked. "I've got an important meeting and I can't be late." Charlie said nothing, but his blue-gray eyes shot that passenger a look that said, "My stagecoach always gets in on time, mister, come hell or high water." The going was tough. It had rained hard for 3 days, and in places the mud was nearly up to the hubs of the wagon wheels. Some spots were so bad that Charlie had to lay branches down for the wheels to roll over, but he kept on going. Suddenly, a traveler appeared. "Bridge up ahead is starting to shake," the dripping stranger called up to Charlie. "Better not risk it." But Charlie Parkhurst just wiped the rain out of his face, tugged his broad-brimmed hat down further on his head, and urged the team on. When they came in sight of the bridge, Charlie could see the floodwaters leaping and pounding against the timbers that held up the bridge. The narrow span swayed and groaned. The passenger knocked on the wall of the coach. "Let's go back," he shouted. Charlie didn't answer. He was judging the strength that remained in that bridge. "Hee up, Jack. Hee up, Jesse," Charlie called to his lead horses. Jack and Jesse pricked up their sodden ears and started off, with the swing horses and the wheel pair pulling hard behind them. As they approached the bridge, Charlie called out again. The trotting horses swung into a canter. Down onto the bridge the coach rattled. Beneath the flying hooves of the horses, the timbers creaked and swayed. "Hee up, hee up, hee up," Charlie shouted, cracking his long whip in the air. The coach wheels thundered over the last few yards of the bridge. First the horses, then the coach, heaved up onto the solid road. Seconds later, Charlie and his passenger turned to watch as the bridge swayed one last time and collapsed like a pile of sticks into the roiling waters of the Tuolumne River. Floods weren't the only dangers in those days. A stagecoach driver never knew when masked men might appear in the road and demand the valuables stored in the express box under his seat. Charlie Parkhurst had sworn that no one, not even that notorious bandit Sugarfoot, would get the gold that he carried for the miners from the mother lode of the Sierra Nevada down to the banks in Stockton. But one day, coming down the Grand west of the Placerville mines, a man on horseback appeared out of the trees. Cantering up alongside the coach horses, he grabbed the left leader's headstall and tried to pull him to a stop. Snack! Charlie's whip shot out and caught the man around the wrist, but he still held on. Charlie urged his horses into a run. Maybe he could shake the man off. Then Charlie saw the man pull a pistol from his belt and wave it at the lead horse's head. Charlie knew that if he didn't pull over, the horse would be shot, the stage wrecked, and the passengers probably killed. "Whoa!" Charlie reined his horses in. 4 more bandits on horseback appeared and leveled their guns at Charlie. Their faces were hidden by masks made out of the leg sections of long johns, with holes cut out so that they could see. Only the leader, who had stopped the coach, was barefaced. "Throw down the strong box," he demanded, keeping his gun pointed at the lead horse, Jack. Charlie reached out under his seat and dragged out the box, heavy with gold. He heaved it over the side of the wagon, where it landed in the dust with a thud. 2 of the bandits hauled it off behind the rocks, while the other 2 took the passengers' money, gold, and watches. Then the leader motioned Charlie on with his gun. As the coach started moving, Charlie stood up in the driver's box. "You got me this time, Sugarfoot," he called in his tenor voice, "but next time I'll be ready. You'll never rob Charlie Parkhurst's stage again." A few weeks later, when Charlie was carrying another big shipment of gold, Sugarfoot and his gang pulled Charlie's coach to a halt again. "Throw down that shotgun," Sugarfoot demanded, waving his pistol at the horses. Charlie had no choice but to heave his new shotgun onto the road. "Now the strong box, Charlie boy," Sugarfoot said. Charlie's mouth set in a line. "Now," Sugarfoot barked. He cocked his gun against the side of Jack's head and laughed. Charlie reached beneath his seat. His fingers groped for the leather handles of the strong box, then closed over the silver pistol he had hidden there. Charlie's bullet hit Sugarfoot in the chest. The bandits' horses snorted and shied. In that instant of confusion, Charlie shook the reins. The team took off with the miner's gold still safe on board. A few days later, the sheriff found Sugarfoot's body in an abandoned mine shaft. The other bandits had fled. No one ever tried to rob Charlie Parkhurst's stagecoach again. There is another side of Charlie that few folks saw. Although he would sometimes drink a bit or gamble with the other drivers, and he was known to swear a blue streak, Charlie was a private kind of person. When Ulysses S. Grant ran against Horatio Seymour for President of the United States, Charlie voted alongside the other fellows, but he never would say which side he was on. On hot days, the other drivers took off their clothes and jumped in the river. Charlie always chose to bathe alone. When the other fellows went out with dance hall girls, good-looking Charlie kept his own company. Although he was liked by women for his considerate ways, he was never what folks would call a ladies' man. Once, though, there was a widow woman on one of Charlie's runs. She fell on hard times, and the sheriff had to put her farm up for sale to pay off her debts. Charlie took his savings and bought that farm. Then he deeded it right back to the woman. At first, people thought that Charlie had set his hat for the widow, or perhaps her beautiful daughter, but that wasn't the case. He'd simply helped them out of kindness. Charlie was like that. After the Iron Horse came to California, Charlie gave up driving. He worked as a lumberjack for a while, and then as a farmer, until his rheumatism crippled him up and Charlie retired to a little shack outside of Sokol. Even then, folks had a lot of respect for Charlie. He was known as a hard worker and a good friend. And though Charlie wasn't one to boast, most of his neighbors knew about his exploits in the driver's box. But it wasn't until after he died that folks learned the whole of Charlie's story. A few of his friends had gone up to Charlie's little cabin to prepare the body for the funeral. When they did, they discovered one more amazing thing about Charlie. That tough-minded, kind-hearted, cool-headed hero of the Gold Rush days wasn't a man like everybody thought. Charlie was a woman, the first woman to vote in the state of California.